Okay, so let's dive into a case that is truly bizarre. I mean, imagine just sitting down for a slice of pecan pie, and suddenly, boom, your home is invaded. This is what happened. This pecan pie, it's just a tiny little piece of a much larger and much stranger puzzle.
You know what really gets me about this case
Yeah.
is the fact that Kay wasn't your average retiree.
Yeah.
This guy was wealthy and had kind of a survivalist streak to him. And there's a lot in his past, like divorces, family disputes, even this weird incident with the dog shooting.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, you have to wonder, was this random or was Kay targeted by someone he knew?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's kind of where things take this really wild turn. So the night of the home invasion, Kay's son Roger and his daughter-in-law Pamela were visiting with, you guessed it, a pecan pie. Kay's wife Dalla was away, but she was supposed to be back later that night. Sounds like just a regular, family evening, right? But here's the thing, their story about this home invasion, it was so strange that the police immediately thought something was off.
We always think that eyewitnesses are reliable, especially victims of a crime, right?
Hmm.
But, research actually shows that in these high-stress situations, memories can be super unreliable. People will misremember details or sometimes even create these false memories and they don't even realize they're doing it.
So walk us through this. What did Roger and Pamela actually say happened? What made their story so strange?
Okay, so they said that these two young men broke in, tied them up with zip ties, and stole guns from Kay's bunker. Just on the surface.
Yeah.
It sounds believable enough, I guess. But when you start digging into the details, things start to get a little weird. For example, Roger actually told the police that he offered the intruders pecan pie if they would just leave. He also said that they very politely listened to him say a prayer. And Pamela described the intruders as almost gentlemanly. Like, does that sound right to you? I don't know. It just doesn't add up.
Yeah, I gotta say, if I was the detective on this case, those little details would definitely be setting off some alarm bells. So what else did the police find suspicious about this whole thing?
Well, first of all, there was zero sign of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle. And there were valuable items that were just left completely untouched. Then they found this weird thing with Pamela's story about a little patch of snow that was all swept clean outside. Based on where she said she was tied up, there's just no way she could have seen it. It all felt very staged, like someone was trying way too hard to make it look like a real home invasion.
Okay, so the story's strange. The crime scene is questionable. What about Roger and Pamela themselves? Did they have any reason to be suspects in all this?
Well, let's just say that Roger had a little bit of a troubled past, substance abuse issues,
Yeah.
even a criminal record, and some anger management problems. And actually those anger problems led to some protective orders being filed against him. Doesn't really paint the best picture, does it?
Yeah, not a great look.
And then on top of that,
Yeah.
you got to factor in the whole financial side of things. Roger was in line to inherit a lot of money from Kay, plus they were having some money problems of their own. And later we found out that Roger had actually tried to get into Kay's security box pretty much right after the murder. So all of a sudden the motive is starting to come together.
So we've got the shaky story, a super suspicious crime scene, and a son with financial problems and a shady past. What happened next?
So even though there wasn't any physical evidence
Yeah.
directly connecting Roger and Pamela to the crime, the authorities decided to take this case to a grand jury. Now, a grand jury is basically just a group of regular people who decide if there's enough evidence to formally charge someone with a crime. It's actually a lower bar than an actual trial. But the fact that they decided to indict Roger and Pamela was a pretty big deal. I mean, it meant that they felt there was enough there to move forward with a trial.
So Roger and Pamela were actually arrested, despite their claims of being innocent. Did anyone even believe their story at this point?
Well, Kay's wife, Dayla, she had actually expressed some concerns about Roger and Pamela, even before all of this happened. And Kay's sister also had her doubts. So, yeah, the family wasn't exactly on their side.
Sounds like just about everyone was convinced they were guilty. But if they didn't kill Kay, then who did?
And this is where the case gets even more crazy. This is where we meet Rachel Bingham. She was the ex-wife of a man named Martin Bond. And let me tell you, she had a dark secret. A secret that would change everything. So Rachel had been living with this really heavy weight on her shoulders. Martin, her ex-husband, he actually confessed to her that he and a friend of his, this guy named Benjamin Reddick, that they were the ones who actually killed Kay. She knew things about the crime that hadn't been made public.
Yeah.
Stuff that only the real killers could have known.
Well, wait a minute. So you're telling me that while Roger and
Pamela are sitting in jail.
Mhm.
The real murderers are just out there living their lives. This is crazy. What exactly did Rachel know? What kind of details? She knew that Martin and Reddy, they went to Kay's house specifically to steal his guns. They tied him up, took him down to the bunker,
Yeah.
and then it gets pretty gruesome. According to Martin's confession, Reddy slashed Kay's throat and stabbed him and left him dead in the bathroom.
Wow, it's just chilling to think that Roger and Pamela just stumbled into this with their pecan pie. I mean, they walked right into a horror movie.
Yeah.
So what did these guys do? When they realized that there were witnesses?
Well, Rachel said that they freaked out, and they tied up Roger and Pamela too. Then they made up this story about the 3 black men to try to throw the police off their trail. It was a bold move, and unfortunately it worked for a while.
So this wasn't just like a case of mistaken identity. This was like a deliberate attempt to frame innocent people.
Wow, so knowing all of this, what did Rachel do? Did she go straight to the police?
It took a little while. I mean,
Okay.
just think about the weight of that knowledge. Seeing those 2 people being accused of this horrible crime,
Yes.
knowing they were innocent, that had to be just agonizing. But eventually the guilt got to be too much, and she decided to come forward.
I can't even imagine how hard that must have been. It must have taken incredible courage to speak out against someone she knew was capable of murder. So what happened when she went to the police? I mean, did they believe her? Well, Rachel didn't just tell them the story. She gave them actual evidence. She told them about the guns Martin had hidden at his house. And she even knew the location, where he'd reburied most of the stolen firearms.
So the police had a location. They had a story that seemed to match up with the details of the crime. And they had a potential suspect. What did they do with all that?
They got a warrant and raided Martin's house. And just like Rachel described, they found the guns. Some of them matched the ones missing from Kay's bunker, and one of them even still had the serial number on it, proving without a doubt that it belonged to Kay.
Oh, wow, the pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. So what was Martin's reaction when they confronted him with this evidence?
At first, he denied everything, but with the guns right there in front of him, he eventually cracked and confessed to his part in the robbery. But he did try to claim that it was Reddick who actually killed Kay.
Trying to shift the blame, huh? Did his story line up with what Rachel had told the police?
Yeah, for the most part. It confirmed the details about the robbery.
Mm.
But he definitely tried to downplay his own role in the murder. He claimed that Reddick forced him to kill Kay, threatened to shoot him if he didn't do it, basically trying to make himself look like a victim.
So the police finally realized that they made a huge mistake. What happened to Roger and Pamela?
All charges against them were dropped immediately. After months of agonizing uncertainty, they were finally free to go home. I can only imagine that feeling of relief, mixed with anger and confusion, and probably a million other emotions.
I bet, yeah, it's hard to fathom what they went through. Their lives were completely upended, based on nothing but lies. Did they get any kind of apology or compensation for what they had to endure?
Sadly, no.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, their nightmare didn't end there. They faced a long road to recovery. Pamela lost her job. They lost their cars, and their reputations were tarnished. The emotional tolls is immeasurable. They tried to sue the authorities for wrongful arrest.
But what, did they ever get justice? Sadly, no. The Supreme Court had ruled that prosecutors and witnesses involved in grand jury proceedings were immune from civil lawsuits. So basically, they had no legal recourse for the injustice that they suffered.
That's awful.
Yeah.
Such a tragic reminder that even when the truth comes out,
Yeah.
the damage can be irreversible. So what about Martin and Reddick? Did they face any consequences for their actions?
Oh, absolutely. They were both arrested and charged with a whole list of crimes. Aggravated murder, burglary, kidnapping. Reddick actually ended up taking a plea deal. He confessed to the crime, testified against Martin, and was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Wow, a plea deal. So he basically got a reduced sentence for admitting to slashing a man's throat. What about Martin? Did he go to trial?
Yep, he sure did. His defense was that the whole robbery was Reddick's idea, and that he only agreed to participate if Kay wasn't going to be home. He said that Reddick forced him to kill Kay, threatened to shoot him if he didn't do it.
It sounds like he was really grasping at straws. Didn't Rachel's testimony directly contradict his claims? Exactly. Rachel testified that Martin had actually bragged to her about how he would kill someone by slashing their throat, which pretty much blew his whole coerced story out of the water. And then there was another twist. An inmate who had shared a cell with Martin came forward with these handwritten notes, where Martin had admitted to killing Kay, claiming he did it out of mercy, because he thought Kay was suffering. His story was full of holes. It just didn't add up.
So with all this evidence against him, what did the jury decide?
Well, they saw right through his lies. I mean, the evidence was overwhelming. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Justice was served in the end, but it came at a heavy price for everyone involved. It's a harsh reminder that the justice system, while meant to protect us, is far from perfect. What are some of the key takeaways that we can glean from this whole case?
I think this case really highlights a number of important issues within our justice system. First, the reliance on eyewitness testimony, even when it's contradicted by physical evidence, is a huge concern. We saw how Roger and Pamela's story, while it was definitely odd, wasn't inherently criminal, but their behavior and their past issues were enough to make them look suspicious. This really speaks to the dangers of tunnel vision in investigations, where authorities get fixated on one particular narrative and ignore any evidence that goes against it.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that everyone,
Yeah.
regardless of their past, deserves a fair and impartial investigation.
Exactly. And this case also raises questions about implicit bias and how it affects the justice system. Did Rogers' past, his substance abuse, his criminal record, did that play a role in how he was perceived and treated by law enforcement? It's something we have to consider.
For sure. It's also a stark reminder that wrongful accusations can have devastating consequences. I mean, these consequences reach far beyond the courtroom. Roger and Pamela lost their freedom, their livelihoods, their reputations, and they got zero compensation for their suffering.
It really underscores the need for greater accountability within the system. We need better training for law enforcement, more thorough investigations that consider all possibilities, and a real commitment to seeking the truth, not just convictions.
This pecan pie, this seemingly innocent family visit, turned into a complete nightmare. That revealed some serious flaws
Yeah.
within our justice system. What are some final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with today?
This case is a powerful reminder that things aren't always what they seem. We need to be critical thinkers. We have to question our assumptions, be aware of our own biases, and demand better from the systems that are supposed to protect us.
It's crazy to think how this whole thing started, with a pecan pie and a family visit. But as we've been talking about this case, it turned into this horrible nightmare that really exposed some major cracks in our justice system. We can't forget about the human cost of all of this. Kay Mortonson lost his life, and his family was left to deal with the aftermath. But then you have Roger and Pamela. They were robbed of their freedom and then wrongly accused of this horrific crime. It's hard to imagine how their lives were shattered and their reputations tarnished like that.
Yeah, it's a tough reminder that even though the justice system is supposed to uphold the law, it's run by people. And people make mistakes, we misinterpret things, and sometimes our own biases can cloud our judgment. And in this case, those human failings had some really devastating consequences.
You mentioned earlier that Roger had that brain injury from that ATV accident. Did that have any impact on how he was perceived during the investigation?
Oh, absolutely. That injury affected his frontal lobe, which is the part of the brain that controls things like memory, impulse control, and emotional regulation. So basically his behavior, it might have seemed erratic or inconsistent, even when he was telling the truth. And sadly, that was misinterpreted as guilt or evasiveness, which just made the investigators more convinced that he was involved in the crime.
So not only was he wrongly accused, but his brain injury actually contributed to the misunderstanding. It adds another layer of tragedy to this whole story.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. This case really highlights how important it is for law enforcement to be trained to recognize the signs of cognitive impairment. I mean, misinterpreting someone's behavior because of a brain injury can have serious consequences, as we saw here.
It makes you wonder how many other cases have been messed up because of this, just a lack of understanding.
It's a disturbing thought, for sure. It speaks to the broader issue of implicit bias in the justice system.
Yeah.
We need to admit that these biases exist and then actually work to do something about it. Everyone deserves a fair shot, regardless of their background, their behavior, or their cognitive abilities.
We've talked about the systemic issues that contributed to this miscarriage of justice, but what about personal responsibility? What can we as individuals do to try to prevent something like this from happening again?
I think it starts with awareness. Be aware of your own biases. Be willing to question your assumptions. And be open to different perspectives. Don't jump to conclusions based on headlines or what you see on social media. Dig a little deeper. Try to find the facts. And remember that everyone is innocent until proven guilty.
That's a good point. It's also really important to support those organizations that are fighting for criminal justice reform. You know, the ones that advocate for the wrongly accused and push for more accountability in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And never underestimate the power of speaking up. If you see something that's wrong, say something about it. Staying silent just lets the problem continue. We all have a part to play in creating a more just world.
This whole deep dive has been quite a journey. We started with a pecan pie and a home invasion, but as we dug deeper, we uncovered a story of deceit, betrayal, and a really serious miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, this case shows us that the truth can be really hard to find. It's a wake-up call for all of us to be more critical, more compassionate,
Yeah.
and more involved in the fight for justice.
It's definitely a story that I won't forget, and I hope our listeners feel the same way. Remember Kay Mortonson, Roger, and Pamela, and all the other people out there who have been affected by wrongful accusations and these systemic failures. Let their stories inspire us to demand better, to do better, and to create a world where justice is truly blind.